representative or symbolic of Babylon. And then he said, in essence, it's going to be destroyed. Because there's going to be a second kingdom that's going to arise. It's going to be an inferior kingdom. So not as grand maybe as Babylon. You know, Babylon was certainly a grand kingdom in terms of what it's done. You've probably heard of the Gardens of Babylon, which some people would say would be during this time. Certainly his palace, which you have a number of relics from, would indicate it was a grand and glorious time. You think about what Nebuchadnezzar had done at this point. He had already conquered Jerusalem and Judah, but also Egypt as well. He defeated Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC, I believe it was. So it's a grand kingdom. He says, but this kingdom's going to fall. There's going to be a second kingdom. It's going to be inferior. That's going to arise. That's what's represented by the second, by the silver. It's following that, there's going to be a third kingdom to arise. And what does he say about the third kingdom? I put it in blue here, the one that's of brass. He says it's going to rule over the entire earth. So the second kingdom's going to fall. And there's going to be a third kingdom that's going to rule over the entire earth. The kingdom of brass. Once that kingdom has passed, there's going to be a fourth kingdom. And that kingdom is going to rule with the strength of iron. A heavy-fisted leader of that kingdom. But he says something else about that kingdom as well in verse 41 through 43. He says it's also going to be partly clay. So clay and iron don't mix. So this kingdom is going to be a kingdom of fractions. It's going to have a heavy leader, but the interpretation would be that it's not going to all come together as one kingdom. And he says during that kingdom, during that time, God's going to set up a kingdom. And that kingdom will never be destroyed. Has God set up a kingdom that's never going to be destroyed? I see a lot of head shaking, yes. You're in that kingdom. Think about that. Think about that. God's telling Daniel through an interpretation of a king's dream that there's going to be a time in the future that God's going to establish a kingdom that won't ever be destroyed. I think Nebuchadnezzar ruled somewhere between 576 to 606. So somewhere during that time frame, there's a prophecy of what? Yes. Yes, Andy.
It's interesting also to note King Solomon had an interesting parallel in 25:2. He said, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings to search out a matter."
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, there's several. I noted that there's several verses that point to this same thing. So, and God's already said, in fact, he says, listen, I'm going to use kings to get to where we're going to get to. Because remember, if we can go back to our study of the minor prophets, and sometimes he'd say, well, wait a minute, why did you use somebody more cruel than me to take over my people? Because that's the way God works. So what's Daniel telling Nebuchadnezzar, which is what God's telling Nebuchadnezzar, is there's going to be 4 significant kingdoms. And in that last kingdom, there's going to be one established that will never die. Clearly a prophecy of the church. Now, you can see the significance of this dream now beyond just the fact that Daniel had the power through God to interpret this dream. This is a prophecy, an important prophecy. So, let's talk about what transpired in history. The gold I've already referred to as Babylon. Babylon existed as a kingdom, and you could go back and look. There's a little bit of dates, maybe a year here, but this one's pretty clear. And I'm getting this from, obviously not from here, I'm getting this from historical context, from historical writings. So Babylon existed from 606 to 539 BC. We say that the Jews are in captivity for a certain number of years, that they're going to be in captivity for a period of 70 years. You say, well, this is not 70 years. Well, what happened is Babylon was overtaken by Medo-Persians. So Darius the Mede, so we think about Daniel and the lion's den, we'll get to that at some point in our study of the Daniel, but Darius the Mede had already taken over at that point. He was a Mede, and he was in charge, or put in charge of the area of Babylon. And Cyrus was the Persian king that was in charge of everything. Cyrus was the one that freed the Jews to go back to their homeland. That was in 536 BC, so exactly 70 years, as Jeremiah prophesied, as Isaiah prophesied, that was going to occur. So the Medo-Persian became the next kingdom to exist at that time. It was in power from 539 to 331 BC. The next kingdom was Greeks. The Greeks overtook the Persians by Alexander the Great. The Greeks were in power from 331 to 146 BC. And we'll get to another point of that a little bit later. And then what's the next world power? The Romans. That's the next world power. They begin in 63 BC. Really, Pompey the Great, I think my slide that I'm going to show you in just a second says Caesar. It was really Pompey the Great that began the Roman Empire. The Romans ruled then periodically up through 476 AD. What occurred? What occurred during the Roman Empire? What occurred during the Roman Empire? We all know. The church. The church was established during the Roman Empire. AD 33. What did the dream say? In the fourth kingdom, what's going to happen? One's going to be established, it's not going to go away. Those of us sitting in this room can attest that for almost 2,000 years, that's true. That's true. Because we're sitting here as a part of that kingdom. And I believe with all my heart it will not be destroyed until the Lord comes again. I'm not saying it won't go through difficult times. It has in the past. It has in the dark ages. But I have no doubts that this kingdom, this church, will continue to be existence till the end of time. Exactly what Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar. A church based on Jesus. Based upon this rock, that confession that Peter made, based upon this rock, that confession that Peter made, this church was established. And I find it interesting. Jesus was considered what of the church? The cornerstone. The cornerstone. What did the dream say? It's going to be a stone. It's going to be stone. And it's going to cover what part of the world? All of it. All of it. Take a look at a few more facts around this. Daniel, as we go through the study of Daniel, he's going to reveal the destruction of Babylon by Darius the Mede under Cyrus the Persian. So he's going to talk about that. When we get through with Daniel, you will have already seen the destruction of Babylon, because it actually occurs in the book of Daniel. When we get to the end of Daniel, during Belshazzar, the last king of Babylonia, which is an interesting point in itself. Just a little side note. I do need to get some pictures out, but just a side note. For many centuries, they said that the that Daniel was incorrect because there was no Belshazzar that ruled. And then in the 1800s, they find a cylinder, or a little tablet, actually, a tablet. And guess what that tablet said? That Belshazzar was ruling. I just think if we could really get through all the things that were in the Middle East, we'd probably find that there's nothing more accurate about history than the Bible. But we're going to understand in the book of Daniel that kingdom, because Belshazzar has a dream, and basically the dream, it's the handwriting on the wall, and we'll get to that. But he says at the end, you're going to die, and you're going to be taken over by another kingdom. And it says on that day that happened. So we're going to just studying Daniel, we're going to see that kingdom was destroyed. The Medo-Persian Empire was inferior to the Babylonian Empire. And the reason it was inferior is that it was really a compilation. Some people like to say it was two kingdoms. It really wasn't two kingdoms. It was one kingdom, but with multiple rulers during that time. Some people would say it's inferior because they didn't do all the great things that Nebuchadnezzar did and the other kings of Babylon, although Nebuchadnezzar is the main king. But that kingdom existed, as I said earlier, till it was overtaken by Alexander the Great. I think, though, during the Medo-Persian Empire, we get actually insights to what that empire was like because a number of things happened during that empire. When Cyrus allowed, at the end of Chronicles, the last two verses at the end of 2 Chronicles, the first two verses at the beginning of Ezra, we find out, in fact, Cyrus freed the Jews. I showed in the first presentation discussing this, the cylinder where actually that occurred. Freed the Jews, but during that time, that's also when the wall was rebuilt by Nehemiah, the temple was restored by Zerubbabel, and Ezra restored the law. He got up and read it, and the people cried. And also, that's also when Esther lived, was during that time, because she is serving one of the kings. So a lot of significant things occurred during that time that we have insights to what that was like based on those three books, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. The Greek Empire was ruled by Alexander the Great, and it was universal. There is a story that was told that Alexander the Great at one point sat down on a rock and cried because there was nothing else he could conquer. If you don't know how universal it was. There's nothing else he could conquer. So I put in blue here exactly what the revelation of that dream said, that this next kingdom will be reversed. The Roman Empire began under Caesar, actually under Pompey the Great, and lasted beyond the time of Christ, which we've already discussed as well. So he said those are the kings. And then the church was established in Acts chapter 2. It's interesting. In my study of this, it was interesting. And what was interesting was this. This is so historically accurate. The interpretation of this dream is so historically accurate that people have spent a lot of time trying to say Daniel couldn't possibly have been written in the 500 BCs. Because it's just too accurate. It has to be a history of what occurred. Because they're saying it just can't be right. It just can't be right that what that prophecy said of that statue of Nebuchadnezzar was so accurate that it was written before his prophecy. It had to be written as history. Well, when was it written? It certainly wasn't written after Christ's time. So they say, well, it was written somewhere in the 100s maybe. Well, the Roman Empire hadn't come yet. Even if you granted that, which wouldn't be accurate, even if you granted that, it wouldn't be accurate. This is prophecy. This is prophecy. This is a very detailed prophecy of what was going to happen. Sir Isaac Newton, which is known for his knowledge, I guess I pulled a Kyle on this one, so Kyle's always taking quotes out of someplace. But so you don't have to ask him. He didn't actually give me this quote. I actually found this one all on my own. It says to reject Daniel's prophecy. You see the time frame Isaac Newton lived. He did a kind of like a commentary on Daniel, and it was included somewhere in that. But I haven't actually found the commentary, and I don't know what year it was written. He says to reject Daniel's prophecy is to reject the Christian religion. For this religion is founded on his prophecy of the Messiah. The vision composed of 4 metals is the foundation of all Daniel's prophecies. It represents 4 great nations who should reign over the earth successfully: the people of Babylonia, the Persians, the Greeks, and Romans. And the stone cut without hands, which smote the image and filled the whole earth, shows that in the days of those Roman kings, the God of heaven would set up a kingdom that should never be destroyed, the kingdom of the Messiah. Now you see that interpretation differently. There's great things that resulted from Daniel's interpretation of that dream. But the most significant of that interpretation is the fact that it's prophetic. It's prophetic about what's going to happen in history. And what did Daniel tell Nebuchadnezzar before he told him his interpretation of his dream? He said, what I'm telling you about is the things that are to come to pass. I'm telling you about the future. And he did. If that doesn't give us confidence to believe that Jesus is Lord and Savior, established a church, then I don't know what we can get. When something written that's borne out in history over a period of 500 years plus turns out to be accurate, this accurate, what more could we ask for? Sometimes I think it's this faith, substance, things hoped for and things not seen. You say, well, okay, we've got to hope for this. Well, I'm telling you, I think in some ways we've seen it, right? We've seen it with the interpretation of the dream. We're going to get to some visions and later on in the book of Daniel, and the visions kind of repeat this. I thought about going directly to them next week, but I don't think I will because they're kind of complicated. I'd like to do all the visions at one time. But I think it's chapter 7 is a vision of 4 beasts, which is exactly the same message that he's sending regarding the statue that he sees. So what's the result of that? What did the king do? Who's bowing to who now? The king bows to Daniel. He bows to Daniel. The king answered Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings, a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal the secret. It's your God. It's your God that was able to do. Nobody else, none of the other wise men could say anything to cause this, to give, not even give Nebuchadnezzar. And they said to Nebuchadnezzar, no man can do this. It takes a God that's not among men to reveal this. And Nebuchadnezzar says, Daniel, that's your God that did that. So he made Daniel a great man, gave him gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon. I guess he fulfilled his promise to whoever could interpret the dream. He became chief or head of the governors. And Daniel requested help from his, I know you won't like this, Kim, but he shifted to the Babylonian names here, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, over the affairs of the province. So Daniel asked if the king, if he could do that. And the king said at the gate of, or Daniel said at the gate of the king, which basically meant that he sat in the king's palace. Some people say he's made ruler of Babylon, but he didn't have absolute power. That's clear, so that can sometimes get confused. But I don't know if he's second in command or if he's third in command or he has great influence with the king. But the king's still ruling because Daniel obviously asked if he could ask his friends to help him in the responsibilities they've been given. So, end result of the interpretation is that Nebuchadnezzar fulfilled his obligation to that when it interpreted, and he has in fact now established Daniel as a leader in the Babylonian Empire. So, from captive to this position. Sorry, I was hoping to have a little time for any questions that you had. It took a little longer to get there, but I appreciate your attention in class this morning, and we'll pick up with Daniel chapter 3 next week. I think that's about a fiery furnace.